the program. But thanks for joining this breakout session. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. It's been something I've been working on for quite a while. And I think you should be able to see my screen, but I just wanted to take a step back for a moment about just how important electric vehicles are to meeting our climate goals. This is information that comes from the Union of Concerned Scientists that's specific to Rhode Island. And you can see that an all-electric vehicle, a vehicle that only runs on a battery that you recharge, as opposed to a vehicle that you fuel with gas, is much lower emissions on a per mile basis when you compare it to a plug-in hybrid, which has both gas and a battery to propel itself forward, and a gas-only car. And so that mostly comes from two things: the fact that electric cars are more efficient, and the fact that our electricity grid is getting cleaner over time. So one thing that gets me really excited is the possibility of having 100% renewable electricity by 2030, which means that cars that we put on the road today are actually going to get cleaner over time as the electricity mix also gets cleaner. So by committing to the 100% renewable electricity mandate, as we have the opportunity to do this year in Rhode Island, as Kai discussed, we also create a pathway to have our vehicles get to zero emissions as quickly as possible. So you can see on the chart here, if we continue with business as usual, electricity gets cleaner over time due to the existing laws on the books. It's a substantial improvement, something you don't have with gas-powered cars. I think they actually lose efficiency over time, and so emissions go up. But the green line there shows the cars that we're putting on the road today are going to have increasing effects in our ability to tackle climate change. So both expanding our renewable electricity and getting more EVs on the road is critical. One key point that's really important, specifically to understand why we think there should be a phase out of gas-powered cars, is the fact that cars last a very long time on the road. You probably own or know someone who has owned a car that's 15 or 20 years old, which means that, you know, there are gas-powered cars being sold today. There are going to be gas-powered cars being sold tomorrow. And so the faster we can replace those cars with electric vehicles, the sooner we can change over the entire fleet, because cars are going to be, you know, lasting for 15 or 20 years. So new cars sold off the lot make up a very small portion of the total vehicles in the state. So that's how we can kind of slowly transition over time, as long as we prepare our infrastructure and help to make sure that Rhode Islanders who are considering getting an electric car don't face the barriers of, you know, not knowing where to charge, not knowing which dealerships offer EVs, and not being able to afford the upfront purchase cost of them, which are all components that the Electric Transportation Act helps to address in this year's legislation that we are supporting. Another key reason that the phasing out of gas-powered cars makes a lot of sense is simply equity. Most Americans never buy a new car in their lifetime, and those that do buy new cars tend to be higher income. And so we think that a phase out targeting the sale of new cars will help to make sure that there's an increasing number of secondhand electric cars on the roads, so that people who never buy a new car can slowly get access to an increasing stock of electric cars that are on the road. So as a quick example of what I mean, if you look at new car sales in Rhode Island, they only electric vehicles only make up about 4% of sales. And if you look at all of the cars on the road, they're only about 0.5% of all of the vehicles are electric. And so we think it's really important to be able to make sure that folks that are buying secondhand cars will be able to access a growing stock of EVs as time goes on. And the only way to do that is to establish a phase out. Another key concern that we often hear about folks regarding, you know, how quickly Rhode Island can transition to electric vehicles is the fact that we're a small state. How much can we really drive where the car market is going and how our policies will influence the cars that are available for sale. And it turns out over the last couple of years, automakers have made huge financial and economic commitments to increase their production of electric vehicles to respond to regulations that other countries and other states have been being put forward. So we see automakers like General Motors and Honda are committing to not sell gas-powered cars after a certain date. And that's in part due to regulations that other states are putting forward to try and get more electric vehicles into their states. And so these are things that can't easily be rolled back, especially it's not dependent on who's in the White House. And so this wave is coming, and Rhode Island should do everything that it can in order to prepare for what is coming. And it turns out this idea is popular. There was a poll done nationwide and then oversampled in Massachusetts that shows that a phase out of gas-powered cars is popular compared to a lot of other ideas to address the climate crisis. So we think that we should take advantage of the fact that people want to see more electric cars on the road and pass this policy in Rhode Island. And as I mentioned, other states are doing this. Most notably, California has committed to not selling gas-powered cars past 2035. New York has done the same. There's legislation up for consideration in Massachusetts that commits to that date. And Washington State passed legislation this year that commits to the 2030 date. So because of Rhode Island's small size, we think this is really possible for us to follow in the footsteps of Washington State and make a commitment so that we can size our infrastructure appropriately. If the state has a goal to make 100% of new car sales electric by 2030, that means it can also figure out exactly how much charging is needed and how much more to invest in charging stations and grid infrastructure and EV purchase incentives to be able to make sure that Rhode Islanders of all incomes can access these vehicles. And those are my slides. I know I went through that really quickly. So if you are interested in learning more, Green Energy Consumers is hosting a webinar on this topic next week where we can dive even more into the details. But for now, I'd love to just open up the conversation to folks that are interested in the work that we're doing or have any questions about the information that I shared with you.
Hey,
Douglas,
curious about public and, like school bus transportation, how that fits in. I haven't read, the current bill, but if that's something I've seen school buses, as a prime target to get rid of all that diesel. People around the country are either buying new or converting existing. So just curious what you guys have seen there.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up because diesel isn't just a climate polluter, but it also harms our health and our air quality more so than gasoline, which is something a lot of people don't realize. It's way worse. And so part of the Electric Transportation Act sets goals for procuring more electric school buses. So the goal is that by 2030, every single school bus purchased in the state is electric. And I will say, in addition to that goal, there's some progress being made both in Westerly, Rhode Island, and on Block Island to start to run pilots to see how school districts can actually acquire these buses. The reason that those two communities are going first is because they actually own their own school buses, whereas every other school district in the state works with a contractor. And so trying to figure out the model of who gets the incentives, how do you, allocate the money appropriately, how do you encourage the private contractor to, work with the school district and the state to be able to move forward on this. Those are all things that are being worked on. And so Westerly in particular is the low-hanging fruit that's being picked first. But yes, we think electric school buses are a total win, also because they're parked for most of the day. And so there's a huge opportunity to use electric school buses as an asset to the grid, just as stationary storage. So when they're sitting there parked, they can offer grid services and be an additional source of revenue for school districts that have them. So we're keeping an eye on it, but that's definitely a goal that we want to set in the Electric Transportation Act. Liberty, I see you unmuted. Do you have something to add there?
Yes. I have it in the chat that another way of reducing emissions is being proposed in 2 cities in Rhode Island, above ground transit. And this is something which is already being, well, it's been done in a lot of places, but there's a company in Boston called Transit X. So the above ground transit they are gondolas, basically. And they have been used and proven in many places. My husband, many of you may know, is a brilliant solar inventor, but he also has something called teleport transit. And this is similar to what the Boston people are doing. We're thinking of trying to get together with them and work together. And we have interest we're talking to some people in both Providence and in Newport about possibilities there. And this could just be such a blessing for people trying to, navigate
Yeah, absolutely. I'll stop you there and just say, the examples that you listed of Providence and Newport in particular have been really exciting just because there's a lot of density. And so being able to get around without a car is even more possible, even in a small, dense state like Rhode Island in those 2 cities. And I know that the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, RIPTA, has focused specifically on Providence and Newport as key hubs that they're electrifying their buses first. So it's really exciting to see the work that they've done to shift their diesel burning buses over to electric buses, especially because, they make up such a tiny portion of emissions, but they've really taken the lead on showing how this can be done in Rhode Island. And a fun fact that I think is just incredible is that because of the work that RIPTA has done to apply for federal grants and electrify their fleet, pretty soon 1 in 5 RIPTA riders is going to be on an electric bus because of the electrification of the R line, and Newport is next on the list. So we have been the biggest cheerleaders for them, trying to continue to fund their work to electrify and expand their services. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Transit and moving people around in vehicles other than cars is going to be increasingly important. And I appreciate your comments there.
This is not about electric buses, although I'm all for electric buses as well. But this is something that will be above ground.
Sure. Yeah. I do see Kevin's hand is raised, so I'd love to give him the opportunity to participate. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled that you're doing so much work in this area because it's a huge cause of mine as well. And so thank you, Mal, and Green Energy Consumer Alliance. I just wanted to say a couple things. I do some EV shows. I'm in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and so I went to one last month, and I got a ride in an electric school bus. So that was really fun, and because the adults probably don't get to do that too often. And it was at the Beverly, Mass. So they have a whole, thing in place. They have a couple electric buses, I believe, and a very enthusiastic bus driver who loves it. She's been driving for years, and she's the one that got picked to do this. So very exciting. Also, I wanted to tell you about Aptera. This is in my background here. I'm a brand ambassador for Aptera Motors, so volunteer. And this is the first car. It's not a car, it's a 3-wheeled vehicle. It's an autocycle. But that's great in Rhode Island because you don't need a motorcycle license. You don't need a helmet or anything. It's a fully enclosed vehicle, and it can get all of its energy from the sun. It has solar panels on top, and it's so efficient that even just these few solar panels can give you 40 miles a day. And so, Aptera can be a never charge vehicle. Also, you can charge it, and it has a range of 400 miles or even 1,000 miles with the biggest battery. It really is a super efficient car that I believe is, the future of transportation. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Kevin. And I think one really exciting component of being in this space is just seeing how quickly the technology is improving. I think even 3 years ago, people were looking at electric vehicles and still it seemed to be a little like the technology had a long way to go. Batteries needed to fall in cost, just things needed to be figured out. And I'm really excited to just be participating in a space where it's getting better all the time. A question I had for you is, are these vehicles on the road yet? Like, can you catch people riding them in Rhode Island?
That's a great question, because that's always the question with all these EVs. You know, you never know whether they're actually going to make it into production. And Aptera has done a huge amount of crowdfunding, and they got $60 million just through crowd funding, which is like a record. It's amazing. And now they're getting some venture capital funds, and they have enough money to get into production. So there's currently 21,000 reservations for Aptera. They're being built in San Diego, which is another good thing. They're being built in the United States. So it looks like they're going to happen definitely by the end of the year. Right now, they're talking about the first car rolling off in September.
That's interesting. Yeah, it seems to align quite well with the timeline of the production of the Ford F-150 Lightning, which, if folks are following that, that's going to be the first commercially available electric pickup truck. And I think there was a groundbreaking for the production of those vehicles just a few weeks ago, and they should also be around sometime in September. They're all kind of spoken for at this point, but it's clear the demand is there, right? People really want to see these cars. And yeah, as long as demand is there, I'm hoping we're going to produce enough of them to meet that demand. So yeah, thanks for that, Kevin. It seems like we'll only have a minute left. Does anyone have any other final things they want to mention before we head back to the room? Cindy, go ahead.
Okay, can you just give a quick rundown about what, if any, incentives there are for Rhode Islanders to buy anything electric, new or used?
Yes, and we have 45 seconds before we're pulled back into the room, so I'll be quick. Right now, the Office of Energy Resources is putting together public comment on a program that's going to be released over the summer. They have about $1 million to help Rhode Islanders buy electric vehicles, new and used. The final details of the program still haven't been released because they're still taking in feedback. One thing that we're advocating for is expanding the program to e-bikes as well, in order to kind of really make electric mobility accessible to all kinds of folks. But if you follow our blog, we'll be able to keep you updated on when those incentives are made available this summer, but they're coming.